Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Federation Hall. I think you all know me by now, and also welcome to our guests online in Zoomland. If you don't know me, my name is David Sequeira. I'm the director of the Fiona and Sydney Meyer Gallery here at the Victorian College of the Arts. And before I introduce our guest speaker, please join me in grounding yourselves in the deep knowledge that long before the Victorian College of the Arts or the University of Melbourne was thought of, that for generations, the Bunurong and Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation expressed themselves through dance and song. They made paintings and sculptures, they shared stories and practiced healing on this land. And please join me in acknowledging elders past, present and emerging. We don't take it lightly that we get to do what we do on this land. So our speaker today, Helen Johnson, is an artist based here in Naarm, Melbourne. Solo exhibitions include pieces of work at Château Shatto in Los Angeles, Agency at Pilar Corrias in London, Ends at the New Museum, New York, and Warm Ties at the VCA London, Chapter House, Cardiff and Artspace, Sydney. Alongside Judy Watson, Helen currently has work on display in the Red Thread of History, Loose Ends, at the National Gallery of Australia in Canberra. In 2015, she published Painting as a Critical Form, which was developed from a PhD in fine art completed at Monash University. She's currently studying a Master of Art Therapy at Latrobe University, and of course, she was a much loved sessional staff here in the painting department. Wherever you are in Zoomland or in Federation Hall, please make Helen welcome.
Thanks for joining me for this talk. It's a while since I've given one and I can feel the anxiety. I'd like to also begin by further acknowledging the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung and Bunurong people as the sovereign custodians of the land we're gathered on today and the land on which I live and work as an uninvited guest. I offer respects to elders past and present and to the elders of the lands people are joining from online as well, and to any First Nations people joining us today. Sovereignty never ceded. I also, just as we begin, want to offer a trigger warning that this talk discusses mental health and in particular focuses on the psychiatric inpatient setting. So if there's anyone who prefers not to hear about these subjects, you're welcome to step out now or at any time during the talk. So rather than go through and talk about my latest work and studio practice, today I want to talk a bit about my experience of training to become an art therapist, which I'm doing currently, and the relationship between that work and the work of being an artist, and some points where those two things meet for me. As an aside, the show that I have on at the NGA with Judy Watson currently is coming down to Mama in September. So just if people are wondering about that show, they'll be, yeah, you'll be able to see it in September if you want to. Okay. As I talk, I'm going to show some images of work that I've made in art therapy sessions and art therapy headspaces. I feel kind of vulnerable showing these here. They haven't been made with being shown in mind, but I feel like connected to these works at the moment, and they feel like an appropriate accompaniment to this talk, particularly since showing work made by people that I work with is not ethically an option. I've put a few therapy memes in my slides too, just for good measure. These come via my friend and peer Claudia Greathead, who I helped to make an art therapy newsletter with for our cohort at Latrobe. So for me, the space between art and art therapy is really interesting and generative. And more I find I'm bringing art therapy processes into my studio practice as ways to kind of tap into emotional and intuitive spaces. And for me, this is manifesting as a shift away from centering my art practice on representational imagery and turning towards what comes from the unconscious through these processes. So I enrolled in an art therapy master's in 2018, and I got offered a place the same day that I found out I was pregnant. So it meant that like growing a human and learning how to be a therapist was sort of entwined for me, and I guess still are. And these, at one point in that course, I was set an assignment that was to just keep a daily visual journal as a way of just engaging with an art therapeutic process, and that journal also became like a record of my pregnancy. So I just included a couple of images of that here. I'm not going to talk much more about that, but I thought it was worth including some of those. It's quite a journey. I'm going to see if I can, if all goes to plan, I'm going to make that book of oil pastel drawings into a facsimile book for the show when I do the show at Mama later this year. When I enrolled at Latrobe, I didn't know much about the therapies, the theories underpinning art therapy, and I found that the first subject was basically psychoanalysis 101, and I'd been in analysis for about a year at that point. So it was like, oh, of course, here I am doing this thing. Last year, I made the decision to, one of Claudia's, to step away from academic work, which I did for 18 years, including it here for a few years, which was really the glory days of my teaching career for me. I decided to step away from that work last year in favour of learning how to be an art therapist. I sort of was looking at the shape of my life and going, there's the studio, that's full on. There's studying art therapy, that's full on. There's being a mother, that's full on. And there's being a teacher, and that's full on as well. And something had to give. I also, to be frank, I found like the logic of the university was becoming more and more sort of deranged for me. And I was also finding on a more serious note that as I studied and learned more about mental health and approaches to trauma, that teaching in art school where I was felt like there were a lot of people, a lot of students processing trauma through their artwork, but there was no formal training for teaching staff around trauma sensitive practices. And that was making me increasingly uncomfortable. So that also fed into the reasons why I left teaching. Just as a little bit of background, I'm not going to be too like boring and theoretical about art therapy, hopefully. But it emerged from psychoanalysis in a Western context. And art therapy doesn't really hold outcomes or audiences as primary concerns. It's also resistant to being positioned outside art as such, because it doesn't define itself against art either. I sort of contrast this with something like institutional critique, which sort of strove to find a place to stand outside this institutional framework, but was always defined by it and giving it a means to expand. Artworks produced in a therapeutic setting can be understood as an expression of subjecthood on both conscious and unconscious levels. They can offer a means for self-expression in circumstances where verbalizing is difficult or unsafe, or both. And art therapeutic making can involve storytelling, psychosocial encounter, or a simple exploration of materials, just for some examples. Broadly speaking, to interpret an artwork in a therapeutic setting is to, in my view anyway, is to impose, disempower or distort the often fragile intentions of another person. And it's something that's just, I guess, generally a no-no in the psychiatric setting at any rate. To interpret in that context kind of constitutes a failure to be with an artwork and its maker. And this, in my experience, is a really different attitude from art school, where interpretation is such a big part of the process of learning and where you look for meaning. Art therapy is offered in a wide range of settings that includes places like palliative care units, cancer wards, rehab spaces, veterans, trauma treatment centres, schools, pastoral care settings, eating disorder wards, psychiatric settings and aged care facilities, just to give a bit of a sense. Coming to art therapy from a fine art perspective, I found its deprivileging of critical interpretation and its disinterest in audiences and outcomes quite refreshing, since both of these things carry such a high premium as cultural capital in the art world that I was more familiar with. And at that point when I started the course was feeling exhausted by, to be honest. And so it became like a way of nourishing and broadening the frame around art as well for me. I found like when I mentioned to people, other artists and stuff that I was studying art therapy, they'd commonly respond with like, oh, you're going to stop making art? And I thought, oh, it's interesting that there's this presumption that those two things can't coexist or are incommensurate. And I found over the years that there are people in both art and art therapy who have kind of internalized negative or skeptical attitudes towards the other field, when actually I think they can learn a lot from each other. Like I have lecturers at Latrobe who went to art school and hated art school and then were like, oh, I found art therapy, what a relief. And sometimes I find they put that on me and treat me like my art school background is a problem. But for me, I'm like, that's your shit. That's not about me. I also think, like on the other side, that there's some artists I talk to about this who kind of, you get the sense that they think art therapy is like corny or on like lesser on some imagined hierarchy or something. And I don't know fully why that's the case, but I wonder if it's to do with intention, because a lot of art produced in art therapy settings has no intention at the outset, usually because intention can hamper unconscious processing. But I feel like art and art therapy are kind of coming closer together now, or there's more points where they touch in my world anyway. So this year I'm doing a clinical placement in a psychiatric inpatient unit at a public hospital. And I thought I'd talk a little bit about that work and how art therapy functions in an acute mental health setting. I thought that I'm hoping that will be of interest to some people to hear about. So art therapy can function in a number of different ways in different settings. Sometimes it can be quite directive and sometimes much less so. And in the psychiatry ward, it's much less directive and quite gentle. In this setting, it's common to work with people who have complex post-traumatic stress, among other complex mental illnesses, or maybe illness isn't the right word, but find themselves in complex situations in relation to their mental health. So this necessitates trauma-sensitive approaches, including avoiding directing people to inward, through some sorts of mindfulness practices, for example, to an internal experience of their organs and things like that is something to avoid. It also requires understanding that direct engagement with traumatic memory is often not beneficial and is especially not an appropriate aim in this sort of short session art therapy environment and sort of encounters that take place there. And so just to give an example of a more directive approach, this is one from Susan Buchholter, who writes, activity, role in the family. Have clients draw their role in the family or the label they were given in the family, example, the artist, the smart one, the athlete, the sloppy one, the shy one, the troublemaker, the leader, etc. Discussion focuses on the client's role in their family, their attitude about that role, and the way in which their self-esteem was affected. Explore the impact the role may have on them as an adult. So to me, this is problematic for a number of reasons. beginning with the default to masculine pronouns, which I changed to non-binary ones for reading out. I think like an activity like that, it's like too much too fast. It's like you're asking someone to just delve right into these complex family dynamics and also giving them labels. So something directive like that would definitely not be appropriate in a psychiatric setting, and arguably would be inappropriate in many other settings too. As my supervisor at placement commented, these sorts of exercises are more about the therapist kind of extracting what they want rather than being a person-centered approach. So setting out to bring about a catharsis for someone in this way can be really unhelpful to someone's therapeutic process, if not outright dangerous. Can be a potential catalyst for PTSD and re-traumatization. And I thought it might be interesting to contrast this with a trauma protocol developed by another art therapist, Savneet Talwar, through her clinical work, though I haven't worked directly with trauma in this sort of way. So protocol in this context means a sort of guide for the structure of an art therapy session. And I'm not necessarily advocating for this approach, but it does seem more attuned to trauma processing to me than Buchalter's. So Talwar's protocol is predicated on an understanding that memories of trauma reside in the limbic system and non-verbal regions of the brain. And in Talwar's protocol, paints are arranged on a table and a large painting surface is affixed to the wall behind, so that the participant walks back and forth between where the materials are laid out and their painting surface. And in the course of a session, the participant is invited to paint negative ideations associated with their trauma and also positive ones, switching hands to stimulate both sides of the brain as they do it. So the theory is that the physical movements coupled with painterly expression stimulate the non-verbal parts of the brain to foster bilateral processing. And Talwar proposes that this helps the brain to release trauma that's frozen in somatic memory. So that sort of resides in the limbic system. So I guess I'm just trying to lay out that there are really different ways of approaching trauma through art therapy, and that attempting direct engagement with traumatic memory is not necessarily the way to assist with processing it. In the psychiatry IPU, where I'm working, where the average stay is 12 days and relationships often only have a short time to form, art therapy is offered as a means to self-regulate and to assist people to stay within or re-enter their window of tolerance, which is to say a space where their mood is level and they're not feeling triggered. Art therapy sessions can also facilitate exploration of personal values and of aims people might have concerning their wellness. Art therapy in psychiatric settings can also offer people a means to explore their emotions, achieve deeper self-understanding, alleviate boredom, increase social interaction, visualize positive futures for themselves, reduce anxiety, and promote self-acceptance. There's a multidisciplinary treatment team in the psychiatry IPU where I am that includes psychiatrists, medical doctors, nurses, psychologists, occupational therapists, social workers, pharmacists, art therapists, a music therapist, therapy dogs, a dietitian, an exercise physiologist, peer support workers and consultants, and a spiritual advisor. So there's heaps going on and heaps for people to deal with in that environment. There's an art room situated at the centre of the two wards that I work on. And the art rooms are quite welcoming spaces and often become a refuge from the noise and chaos of the ward for people. Group art therapy sessions are run 6 days a week, and one-to-one sessions are available too. They used to run less art therapy, but they found the more they run, the less incidences of conflict there are on the ward. The population changes from week to week, and the building of trust and rapport is commonly limited to a small number of sessions, sometimes only one session. And this means the group dynamics are different for each session, and group cohesion can be quite difficult to establish and hold. One of the things talked about in group therapy theory is this idea of the life of the group, which in some contexts can be a trajectory that builds slowly over months or years. But in this setting, the entire life of the group generally occurs in a single session, because the next group's going to be a different set of people. So yeah, really different experience from what I was used to as a teacher, engaging with student cohorts over stretches of years. The sessions that I run often start with like a grounding exercise, just to establish like a sense of calm and a bit of focus. My placement supervisor described the art therapist's role as trying to hold space while there's an earthquake going on in this context. And I've definitely experienced this. It's common for there to be vastly differing levels of energy within a given group, and learning how to hold that space and not have it just dissipate and everyone disappear is quite a challenge for me. I guess it's thinking about like, how do you find the collective window of tolerance within that given group of people, and it can be really narrow if there's some people who are experiencing mania and other people who aren't really flat, for example. And you're also kind of defending that space against constant interruptions from nurses and registrars and doctors who kind of come in and just go, can I see you, and block people out without sort of talking to you. So I find that the sort of assertiveness I need in this setting is quite different from the presence that was required of me as a teacher. When we do placements in art therapy, we have to formulate a list of learning goals. One of mine is to develop my instincts around when it's appropriate to be assertive and when it's better to sit back, which I feel is like, yeah, figuring out what my developing self as therapist is in relation to my receding self as educator. Yeah, just as an example of this, I ran a group session on the equinox, a few weeks ago, and there were 3 women in the group. And we started with a grounding exercise. It was super chill, and one woman fell asleep, and the energy was really calm and relaxed. And the participants were really focused and using charcoal and watercolors to draw lines, just connecting to the rhythm of their breath and then taking that where they wanted to. And about 20 minutes in, one of the participants was called out to talk to a doctor, and when she returned, a nurse came and gave her some meds, and then her focus was kind of broken, and her fellow participant got up and left, and then the woman who was sleeping was woken up by that and was like, oh, I'm so embarrassed I was asleep, and left as well. And then we were like, it's so fine that you were asleep. So then I was like, I found that I couldn't re-establish that sense of calm, that focused space we've been in. But I also think I still have this feeling in an internal feeling when someone gets up and walks out, that it's like, oh, has something gone wrong? But actually it's just really common in that setting, and people just sometimes need to get up and go, and that's what they need to self-regulate. I think about my middle-class white woman setting in this setting often, and in art therapy more generally, which is a really white woman-dominated field. You know, they send us out on these placements that go for a whole year to work with minority and marginalised people, and there's this one cultural sensitivity subject tacked on at the end of the course after all the placements are over, if you're part-time, which is pretty frustrating to me and a big structural problem with the course, I think. I think about the way my subject position inflects my work in the IPU on a number of levels. For example, I think about it just cutting out collage materials from magazines for later use, because often we can't use scissors, so we just pre-cut a whole bunch of images. you know, and just thinking about the choices I'm making, going, what does this image of a room that I kind of find looks cozy represent to someone else? Like, is it something unattainable, or something they lost or walked away from, or something excessive? And like, I can't know that. And I have to remind myself all the time that my lens is just that. It's a lens, and it's inflected with my privilege, and I bring that to the space. And the least I can do is be aware of it. So the specific art therapy sessions held on the IPU are a reconnecting workshop, which is oriented around engaging with natural materials, a restoring workshop, which is a safe space for women and gender diverse people, a creative calm studio, which is a sort of relaxed open studio style group, and a wellbeing workshop where people are invited to use collage and various materials to explore what wellness means to them. And we often put on just gentle music and aromatherapy in the space. I also co-facilitate a session with the music therapist, where people can choose songs from a book that the music therapist plays on guitar at people's request, while they respond with pastels and paints, just thinking about what colour does this song make you think of, and you know, they can sing along if they want. And that's been a really popular group so far. The wellbeing sessions have been designed in relation to wellness plans that each person's invited to complete as they approach discharge. The idea being that having a visual record of your strengths and the things that help you keep well, and something you could choose to put on display if you wanted, can be more helpful than like a black and white form if you're spiraling and you need to, you know, need a circuit breaker. This collage was one that I made during one of those sessions early on, when I was just sitting in as a participant and observer rather than a facilitator. Sometimes in these sessions, people get pretty deep into the art making and lay out heaps of their feelings and thoughts, and other times people might come in and just work for a few minutes and then that's enough. There's no right or wrong way to participate, as people can engage on their own terms. Some people will display their work on the art room walls, and others will keep everything they make in a folio. But it's also not uncommon for people to leave their work behind or chuck it in the bin. And this doesn't mean they haven't gotten something out of it. It can just be like a form of closure or a shift back into another headspace, or, you know, it's a pain. So just moving towards wrapping up this talk, I'm going to just shift a bit here and talk about Marion Milner, who was a psychoanalyst and also an artist. In her book, Not Being Able to Paint, which was published in 1950, Milner wrote, "Before beginning a painting, one could spiritually envelop the object and feel inspired, transcending space and separateness. But once begun, it was necessary to face the fact of being a body that does not transcend space as the spirit can. At the moment of having to realise the limits of the body, when beginning to make marks on the paper, all the anxieties about separation and losing what one loved would come flooding in. And then there could come also, with the anxieties, an attempt to ease them by calling on the imposed moral law, turning to rules, yet by that very reliance on rules, perhaps stultifying from the start the very thing one is seeking to achieve." This is sort of the basis of what Milner talks about as the condition of not being able to paint. This is a book she wrote to try and understand her creative block. And it was arrived at through the process of trying to teach herself to paint. So it's like a blockage. She thinks of it like a blockage that asserts itself at the moment when the painter is, or the artist is like confronted with their own body, and then they kind of think, oh, my body can't do what my mind wants it to do, and retreat into rules that then kind of stifle expression. And maybe I feel like she talks about this as a moment of failure, but I think it's also a moment when the possibility of something real emerges, that stoppage kind of arrests the preconception of what you thought you could achieve. And if you can keep moving through it, you can open a space for something else to flow out. And I feel like you know, often in art therapy settings, you get people saying, oh, I can't do art, like I'm not an artist. And it's like, no, you don't need to be an artist to do this, and you don't need a vision. You just need to be willing to pick up the material and make a mark, and that's it. I find myself kind of returning to Milner's writing through this process of studying to be a therapist and as well as being an artist, because I think she inhabits a space between art and art therapy, with this kind of push and pull between conscious lingual parts of the brain and unconscious reptile ones, and trying to engage in a process of figuring out a space for each and what relation they have to one another through creative expression. To quote Milner once again, and again I've adjusted her use of masculine pronouns to non-binary ones to read this out. The painter as painter has tried to solve the problem on another plane than that of external reality. They have invented a halfway house between the dream receiver and the external one, a halfway house that is more pliable and under their control than the external world, but also more fixed and stable than the merely internal dream receiver of their love. In this way, Milner argues, a painter has the privilege of developing and working with their psychic potentialities in ways that others don't. And maybe others do now, maybe even in the 50s, 40s when she wrote this book, in her view. But with painting, and I would say with tactile art making more generally, you're left facing an object produced between your subjecthood and your idea of the world. And the question of whether an artwork is more valued for the process of its making or its outcome doesn't diminish its function as a medium that can enable an encounter with yourself and with the world. And I think that carries for both fine art and therapeutic art, and the space where they meet each other, spaces where they meet each other. And that's it. That's what I wanted to say.
Thanks so much, Helen. I'm going to try putting the lights back on. Wait a minute. Oh, they're coming on. Good. Well, thank you so much, Helen. That was so great to hear this part. Can I call it your practice or your art therapy practice, or just your practice?
Yeah, whatever, anything goes.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for sharing that dimension of your work. I just feel it's such a generous thing that you we all know the work that you do that gets exhibited around the world, but it's quite another thing to share this work with us. We've got time for questions, and if you've got a question, if you're in Zoom land, could you use the Q&A facility? And if you're here, if you could just raise your voice, and June, who's managing the Q&A facility, will also run around with a microphone. And perhaps I could kick off. I've got a bunch of questions, just so you know, but the question I wanted to ask was actually about a lot of the material that you showed, and I could have got this wrong, but it seemed to be about having a calming influence. And I just wondered if there was an aspect of art therapy that was about getting out a violent or a kind of externalizing an aggression inside, or, and I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, there absolutely is. I think that kind of engagement through art, it tends to happen, or like if it's going to happen safely, it tends to be more like in a one-on-one situation where you've built up trust between yourself and a therapist over a long period of time. And that therapeutic relationship can act as a container to bring out some really full-on emotions. In the psychiatric space where people are, their moods are really unstable a lot of the time, and they're in there trying to find some equilibrium. It's not really something that that you would set about trying to do in that space. But yeah, I can't speak for other spaces. My other placement was in aged care, and it wasn't something we did there either, although one of my fellow students described a scene where she was running a group session in aged care and some people got into an argument. It was like during COVID and everyone's personalities were really magnified in that space because they like were in full on lockdown in aged care last year. And she had a pile of newspapers in her trolley for just putting on the table, and she was like, just put your feelings into the materials, here, rip them up, do what you want. And everyone, they all just stood up and started like shredding this paper and chucking it, and it turned into this party, and they were all pissing themselves laughing. So it was a nice moment of sublimation or something, I suppose. Yeah.
A question that's coming on Zoom, and that is, I'm interested if you include craft such as crochet for instead of therapeutic mindful methods, which could be done outside of the art therapy classes.
Yeah, absolutely. And there is like a limited amount of weaving and knitting and stuff that goes on in the psych unit. But there's restrictions on like the lengths of wool and things like that you can have. But often our role is also like for people who come to the sessions and talk about like, oh, this, you know, can I have more of that material? This was really helpful for me today, or that kind of thing. Then we can sort of make sure that goes into their discharge plan as like this person, you know, or like, you know, someone who's really gotten into painting who's currently there was, you know, it's like, can we make sure that the NDIS will fund for him to have materials to use when he gets out, so he can continue that practice. And yeah, but there's a lot of kind of craft oriented activities that go on in that setting for sure. Yeah, there's no high and low art.
Yes. Does anyone else have a question? Yeah, please. We're still navigating how to do questions via like live and Zoom. So
Yeah, it's a bit complex, isn't it?
Yeah, I was just going to ask, in terms of kind of like more software practices, say like taking a shade that doesn't necessarily have like sharp, pointy things, like in the context of the psych ward, how does kind of more software practices like kind of set themselves into something like art therapy, or is it more like two-dimensional?
I haven't had experience with paper mache, but there's often clay is used, like air drying clay, and used like in conjunction with natural materials as well. So it's often like the restrictions of just things like we don't have a kiln, you know, we can't use things that are toxic. But yeah, if people want to make physical things, like non-two-dimensional things, they can. Yeah, and a lot of the time, like if we're not running sessions in the art rooms, then the art rooms are just open and there's a range of materials around, and some people really take up that invitation and make it their own space and get really prolific.
any other questions? I've got one more question.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and that question is, a lot of the work you showed was very much about individuals.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder if you had any comments about people undertaking art therapy in groups, like making
making a mural or something.
Yes,
like
making
that.
something collaboratively or together, and whether that has a place in
Absolutely.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's something I haven't done myself in my newbie art therapy experience, but I know someone who did a project out in Box Hill at a community centre where a whole group of people worked together to make a mosaic on the ground in a garden space that was like an incredible and complex achievement. I think it sadly ended up getting dug up because they redeveloped the site. But yeah, I think that kind of work it often happens in community settings and stuff, and it can be really useful to like help people with group cohesion, especially like if people are reintegrating back into community after being hospitalized or being incarcerated and things like that. I think like collaborative group projects can be really valuable experiences to help people feel included, and like they can achieve something out in the world.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Helen. I just couldn't help myself. Well, I've actually never heard anyone bridge the conversation like we had today between art therapy and art. I just really want to thank you for that. And just, anyway, it wasn't such beautiful observations that's with such depth. And I guess what struck me, I don't know, maybe there's a comment on what you want, I don't know whether you want to articulate ones, but this kind of deep parallel between the non-verbal, non-lingual, I'm not trying to use the right words here, decisions one makes in the moment of making art. It's quite strong parallels in some ways in that deep space, and how, when we don't talk about it much in art making, but there are spaces quite subliminal and intelligences that operate that are beyond the verbal. I think there's something that you articulated today that's shared in that space.
Yeah, I agree so much.
And I mean, I guess I always talk about it, I just have something in my stomach that tells me what I need to do next. And being led by your stomach, the only words I've got to really explain that space. Yeah. And the logic of the artwork can connect with your stomach to help you make decisions as you move into that weird space of it's not logical of making art.
Yeah, I agree. Absolutely. I mean, I think, and I hope it wasn't really dull for me to like outline, this is what happens in art therapy and these are the ideas, because I was like, it was a bit of a mystery to me before I started studying it. And I thought, that why does that mystique exist, or that gap in knowledge between the two? But yeah, I feel like that gut feeling and that lizard brain engagement is, and I don't mean that as a derogatory thing, I just mean like your amygdala. I think that's at the center of both. I think that the difference is like where conceptual articulation resides, and it's like in art school settings, and as an artist, for me, it's like there's that expectation for things to return to ideas and language, but in art therapy that doesn't exist. It's like the process is done. We can have a little moment to reflect if you want, and that's it. And it's like you're not sort of, there's none of the kind of, we need you to write a press release or a blurb about this.
Or your other statement.
Yeah, exactly.
Or your research statement.
Yeah, and I guess like maybe that's why it has a reputation of being wishy-washy in some circles, but I think it's just a matter of like the attitude you bring to that. Like it's in my studio, I have 4 assistants who come just a day or 2 a week and help me do like the bigger kind of legwork tasks in there, and I couldn't have my practice without them. And just recently I've started like inviting them to do just really gentle art therapy processes on some days to start the day. And it's just like such a different headspace, because on the ward, when I was first just observing and getting really absorbed in being a participant in an art therapy group, because I'd never done that before. And then one of the other art therapists was like, it's great, you're getting like so into it, but you need to kind of step back a bit from that and start paying more attention. to what other people are doing. And I was like, and it made me realize, like, I really need that space. It's become a really important generative space for me. So I was like, I'll take that to the studio and carve out like an hour a week where that can happen in the studio, and my assistants can also have that time to just do what they want to do and, you know, feel their way through with some materials. And yeah, that felt really productive to actually physically bring those two things into proximity, because when I started that course, I was like, my art practice and what came out in art therapy groups was completely, you know, they didn't touch each other. And the more I do it, the more they're connecting, which is, I didn't expect, but I like.
That's completely compelling. Thanks.
No worries. Thanks, Marion.
Helen, we're going to leave it there. Just thank you again for such really outrageous generosity today. And
Thanks
you
for
know,
listening to me. That was outrageously generous.
no, it was just great to be with you and explore this part of your work. So please join me wherever you are in Zoom or in Federation Hall. And thank you, Helen.